And my final guest this morning is the leader of the SNP and the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon, welcome. You have said recently nobody in the SNP wants to see a border between England and Scotland, but you're also committed, if you achieve independence, to joining the EU and the single market, which does mean a border. You can't have both. So which is it?
Well, I want us to be part of the world's biggest single market. It's 7 times the size of the UK market. But of course, I want to and will work with others to make sure we keep trade flowing easily across the border between Scotland and England. Remember, of course, nobody with any credibility suggests that an independent Scotland wouldn't continue to be a member of the common travel area, so free movement of people across the UK, and if we were in the EU, across the EU would be guaranteed. But the point I'm making is that it's not the SNP that raises issues of borders. This issue only transpires because of the UK government's Brexit obsession and the fact that they have ripped Scotland out of the EU against our will. And the question for Scotland, of course, we want to keep trade flowing across the England-Scotland border, and that would be in the interest of England as well, and we would work to make sure that happens. But do we also want to return to a position where we have free trade across the European single market? The absence of that right now is causing real economic and financial harm to our exporting companies.
I'm just suggesting that whatever the history, you can't have both. 60% of Scotland's exports go to the rest of the UK and more or less the same coming back. So that border staying open is really important. But inside the EU, they will expect you to police that border.
And we will work to make sure that we have trade flowing easily across that border. Just in point of fact, Andrew, as I'm sure you are aware, Scotland exports more manufactured goods to the rest of the world than we do to the rest of the UK. So the importance of being able to trade freely, not just across the UK, which is important, and I have never tried to suggest otherwise, and we will need to work to make sure that can be secured. But the importance of being able to trade across the European single market area and indeed internationally is also really, really vital. And the invidious position that Scotland had, let me finish the point. The invidious position that Scotland has been forced into of losing access to the single market is not some abstract hypothetical. It is costing our exporting businesses, particularly in our world-class food and drink sector, a lot of money and a lot of lost economic opportunity right now. We shouldn't be forced to choose between these two things. That is something that has happened to us against our democratic will, and it is a very real price that Scotland is paying right now for not being an independent country.
Well, you picked me up quite rightly on point of fact. You say, well, let's stick to point of fact. I've got the EU regulations here governing the physical checks on consignments of animals and goods entering the Union. You would be part of this Union under your proposals, and that sets out which goods need to be physically inspected as they enter the single market. 30% of poultry, eggs, milk and fish, 100% of live animals. Can you explain to people watching how, as a member of the EU, you would police that border as would be your duty?
I'm not denying what the EU regulations say. I am not denying that because of the absurdity of Brexit and the Tory Brexit obsession, then all sorts of issues are raised for Scotland completely against our democratic will. What I'm saying is we would work as a country to make sure that for our businesses there was no difficulties in terms of their day-to-day experience in trading. But the other point I am making, which is a really important point, is that right now we have been are being denied access on that free trade basis to a market that is 7 times bigger than the UK market. And I want Scotland to be able to trade freely across that. And yes, to do the work that takes away the practical difficulties for trade across the England-Scotland border. Nobody is trying. So we're not, if you're trying to have a debate with me here about what the EU regulations say, it's a pretty one-sided one because I'm not denying it.
I'm not. I'm just saying the EU regulations absolutely commit you to a physical border posts along the Scottish-English border. Now, you may wish Brexit didn't happen, but it has happened. And where we are now, entering the EU and being part of the single market requires a physical border with England for an independent Scotland. Now, the only ways out of that are you can persuade the EU to give up on the single market regulations as they apply to Scotland, and good luck with that, or you can persuade the English to give up on Brexit, and good luck with that. I don't see your way through here.
We will put in place arrangements, and we will negotiate those arrangements with the UK that means that businesses do not, in a practical sense, suffer from any of that. And of course, before we get to a point where we're asking people to choose whether or not they want Scotland to become independent, which is the choice of the Scottish people, just as we did in 2014, we will set out all of the implications of independence, all of the advantages of independence, and all of the practical issues that people have to consider so that people make an informed choice. But the difference between that and what we are suffering right now in Scotland is that Brexit has happened to us. And as I say, it's not abstract. Our companies right now are having to deal with border issues that have been imposed on us completely against our will. The difference with independence is we look at all of the implications and we make a choice over what in the overall consideration is best for Scotland's interests. Right now, this is all happening to us because we don't have that choice.
I understand that, and I'm going to come to Brexit in a moment. But before we do, let's stick to the detail again. If Scotland rejoins the EU, businesses exporting to the UK would have to fill in customs declarations, which cost between £15 and £56 a piece. And some would need to fill in export health certificates, which cost up to £175 each. Are you telling Scottish exporters to the rest of the UK that is a price worth paying for independence?
We'll set out when we come to an independence referendum what the implications are and whether we would be proposing measures to mitigate any of that for businesses. These are choices people will get to make on the basis of full information. But of course, Scotland voted against Brexit. And right now, our export businesses, you're projecting into the future, which is absolutely legitimate because I'm proposing independence. But right now, our businesses are facing these barriers. They're facing these costs. They're facing all these inconveniences. And it's completely against the will of the people of Scotland. So if Scotland in future chooses independence, it will choose independence with full availability of all of the information so that people can take a considered view and reach an informed choice. And that is how democracy should work in any country. But of course, that's not Scotland's experience right now.
Your proposal in this election is it's a stepping stone to the referendum, which is a stepping stone to independence. So it is part of the same argument. This is part of the independence argument throughout this election. And the only point I'm putting to you is that the course that you have chosen does necessarily and more or less inevitably mean a hard border with England.
Andrew,
you can say there'll be arrangements for discussions, but
you've just said there the course You've just said there the course I have chosen.
Which is Scottish independence and EU membership.
If Scotland becomes independent and, you know, the scenarios that you're trying to paint for me here transpire, that will be because not I have chosen that. That will be because a majority of the Scottish people have looked at all of the arguments, have looked at all of the information, have looked at all of the detail and have made that choice for the future of Scotland. I'm
just putting to you the facts of EU membership. Facts are chews that will not ding, as somebody said. I mean, and they are the facts there. They are what you will face after independence.
And have I denied any of the facts of the rules of EU membership?
No, you haven't. But you haven't explained how you can maintain an open border in those circumstances at all.
We will put.
You said there'll be negotiations, but how?
And that we will keep trade flowing freely. We will comply with all of the requirements of EU membership, but we will put in place arrangements to keep trade flowing. And of course, for people, right now, people in Scotland have lost their freedom of movement across the European Union. Independence with Scotland as part of the common travel area. Not only do we keep our ability to travel freely across the common travel area, we get the ability again to travel freely across the European Union. Right now,
Scotland will be
our
the
rights
only...
have been diminished.
I'm not
against
I'm not
our
arguing with you about that.
And in future, if Scotland chooses to be independent and chooses to come to a conclusion that on balance, all of these things are in our best interest, that will be a democratic choice that Scotland makes on the basis of all of the information that is put before them.
Of course it will be. I'm only putting it to you that under your proposal, Scotland would be the only part of the EU which had an open border for goods and animals and food processing and so forth with a non-EU member. It would be the only part of the EU that had that advantage, and I think it's highly unlikely, that's all. Can I ask you, has the SNP modelled the impact of independence on people's incomes?
Not yet. We will do all of that as we did in 2014 as we get to an independence referendum. And we will do that then. Why? Because that will take account of all of the up-to-date financial and economic information. I mean, if we had done that, for example, just over a year ago, before the COVID pandemic struck, then obviously that modelling would be out of date now because the world has been turned upside down. So we put the information before people when we get to the point of asking people to make a choice. And of course, none of that was put before people in the Brexit referendum. Whether people agree with it or not, you can go and look at the 2014 white paper where all of the information was put before people and people were asked to make a choice. And we will do that again when we get to the point of asking people to choose independence.
Don't you think it's shameful that a government looking to take Scotland out of the UK hasn't even bothered to look at the impact on the economy?
If I was asking people a week on Thursday to vote on the question of whether or not Scotland should be independent, then yes, I would agree with that. But I'm not asking people to make that choice on Thursday. And if I was to do all of that modelling now, we'd have to redo it when we got to the point of asking people to make that choice, because I believe it is right to only ask people to make a choice of that magnitude and of that importance on the basis of quality, up-to-date information. That's what we did in 2014, and it is what we will do again. We're in an election to the Scottish... Well, hold on. We're in an election to the Scottish Parliament where I am asking people to vote for me as First Minister to continue to lead us through a global pandemic, then to implement a manifesto, a bold, transformative manifesto to get our recovery kick-started and to drive that recovery forward. And then, yes, when we're out of the crisis, to give people in Scotland the choice over what kind of future we want and what kind of country we want to build. And I will put before the people of Scotland the information they need to make that informed choice when we're asking them to make that. That's the right and proper way to proceed.
It's just that you said back in 2018, you said, I really do think it is shameful that the UK government is the government that's looking to take the UK out of the European Union and hasn't even bothered to properly look at the impact on our economy.
Yes,
and you're
Andrew.
in the same position.
No, I'm not in the same position. I mean, with the greatest of respect, Andrew, when I said that, they had had a referendum without putting that position forward. They were in a negotiation with the EU, imposing or in the process of imposing a hard Brexit without having done that. We were in the reality, not just of people having been asked to make a decision, but that decision being implemented. I am talking about a referendum in the future where people get the choice, that when we ask people to make that choice, you're absolutely right. It would be shameful for somebody in my position not to put that information before them. But you're asking me to put the cart rather before the horse, and you're comparing apples and pears, frankly, in terms of the two positions you're putting before me right now.
I have a cart and some pears or something here because the LSE...
Well, good. Well, perhaps we could go on to them in the right order. We've got a Scottish Parliament election in just 10 days' time.
We do.
We could perhaps maybe talk about it.
OK. The LSE's Centre for Economic Performance have done some modelling, and they say that leaving the UK and rejoining the EU could drive down Scottish incomes by between 6.3% and nearly 8%, 7.6%. Is that the price people should be willing to pay for independence?
I think if that's the study, I think you're quoting at me, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong here. I think by its own admission, it was a very narrowly based study that didn't properly take account of the advantages.
You say narrowly based, Nicola Sturgeon. You say narrowly based, but it's exactly the same study which produced the same model that you were quoting after Brexit. And then you said this analysis demonstrates that leaving the EU will have a profound and long-lasting impact on the public finances and the wider economic and societal well-being of Scotland. It's the same economist, the same model, the same analysis.
Fine. Well, you know what you're quoting. I don't know for sure what you're quoting because I don't have it in front of me, but I will take your word I will take your word for that, and I'll engage on the substance of the point. You see, the point you're putting to me, Andrew, is leading or asking people to lead to a conclusion that says that somehow uniquely, you were talking about unique situations earlier on, that somehow uniquely Scotland is incapable of being a successful, prosperous, independent country, notwithstanding the fact that we look across Europe right now, we look across the world, and we see a plethora, a multitude of countries similar in size to Scotland, sometimes smaller than Scotland, lacking all of the resources that Scotland has. And, you know, by and large, almost without exception, these countries are wealthier than Scotland. Right. They are healthier than Scotland. They are happier in terms of the studies that are done. Scotland is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And if you're pointing me to studies that are about Scotland's fiscal position within the United Kingdom, then frankly, that's not an argument against independence. That is an argument for Scotland being able to take control of our vast resources, make better economic decisions than Westminster governments tend to make on our behalf, and build the same prosperity that countries similar to us enjoy already. So frankly, these are arguments for Scotland becoming independent, not against.
To be absolutely clear, of course I am not suggesting that an independent Scotland could not be prosperous. I am suggesting that there are choices and hard choices to be made.
Of course.
According to the IFS, your deficit is going to head towards 24 to 25% of GDP, much, much higher than the rest of the UK, and vastly worse than the 3% that the EU require for candidate states. So there is an enormous gap there to be filled. And yet in this election, you are spending money in all directions.
For me here. You're making my point for me here. That deficit that you talk about, and you're quoting, I think, an IFS study that's not actually published yet, if it's the one I've read about in a newspaper this morning. But you're quoting a study that is about Scotland's fiscal position within the United Kingdom. It's not a reflection of what Scotland would be like as an independent country. And I'm sure it hasn't escaped your notice that the deficits and debt of all countries over the past year has increased, as countries quite rightly have borrowed to support COVID policies. The UK debt has gone over £2 trillion. Now, right now, the taxes that are paid in Scotland pay for health and education, all of those devolved services, as well as reserve services like welfare and pensions. So we raise the money to pay for all of these. There is still a net payment coming over the border from the south. And like every other country, we would have a deficit if we were an independent country tomorrow. But there's no credible economists in any other country suggesting that countries should manage those deficits through austerity and cuts. Again, why would Scotland be unique? And you talk about tough choices. Scotland needs no lectures about tough choices. We have suffered a decade of Tory austerity. Again, a bit like Brexit, completely against our will, where other countries chose to deal with the financial crash differently. This is about choices, but it's about choices that we make as a country and are able to take ourselves, not choices that are imposed upon us, which is Scotland's experience all too often right now. But whatever its origins, you are facing a really big deficit, which has to be closed somehow. In this campaign, you're offering lots of new public services and lots of new public money. My question to you is very, very simple. How are you going to close the deficit? Well, if you're asking me about our manifesto for this election, I'm assuming you're familiar with the Scottish Government's medium-term financial strategy, which was published in January, which takes account of the projections from the Scottish Fiscal Commission, the OBR, in terms of the growth in our tax revenues over the lifetime of the next Parliament, also takes account of the best assumptions we can make, because we are still within the UK, of what the Barnett formula will deliver in terms of resources to Scotland, and we make a cautious assumption about what that allows us to deliver. And we're choosing to invest in things like, 100,000 new affordable homes, for example, which will also help to kickstart economic activity and be a boost for our economy. Longer term, if you're projecting forward to when Scotland is independent and you're asking me how we deal with a deficit, we'll deal with a deficit in the same way almost every other country across the world that has a deficit deals with that. You manage your finances through borrowing, through prudent decisions about public spending. Again, Scotland would not be unique as a country with a deficit. We have run out of time, I'm afraid. It would almost be unique if it didn't have a deficit, and we deal with that in the way that independent countries the world
this
over.
This is
deal
a
with
conversation that could go on for hours, I suspect, but we have run out of time. Nicola Sturgeon, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We'll have those hours later on. Thanks for all my guests today, and of course to you for watching. But until next Sunday, goodbye.